left doesn't know how to laugh, and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called The Left Does Not Know How to Laugh. And I'm sure you've had this experience before where you've been amongst friends and maybe new people, like you go out to dinner or you go out to lunch or you're just in a group setting somewhere. And some of the people with you are your friends you've known for years and others are kind of new. And you tell a joke. You say something that you think is funny and someone gets offended. How many times has that happened to you? It's happened to me before. I do love comedy. Just on a personal note, whenever my family and I go on vacation, one of the things that we always enjoy doing is actually booking a comedy club and actually going to see a comedy act. And we've done that in different cities across the country. And it's fun because you do get to see the up and coming talent. Some of them, of course, are terrible. Some of them are funny. And the funniest people, of course, are those who use really clever humor, not like the gutter humor. But for me, it's just like the really smart, clever humor, kind of like the George Carlin kind of humor. And so we're talking about this issue of why the left why they take jokes so personally and they get offended all the time, why they have lost the ability to laugh. And so in the Wall Street Journal, there's an article today entitled, "Laughter Can Defeat the Left. They make themselves ridiculous as they try to kill comedy." And so I'm going to read this, and then we have a couple of hysterical clips for you to kind of prove our point. But this article starts out as, "A transgender weightlifter and a horse walk into a bar. That's not funny. Welcome to the wonderful world of woke comedy. And it's not as if they say it with indulgent attitude your mother used to have when she knew it was inappropriate but was kind of amused anyway. No, these people are not joking. They'll kill your career, get your children to turn on you, dredge up your every purported misstep, and make sure all of it goes on your permanent record. We're talking about a mentality that blacklisted the Seinfeld show episode in which Kramer stomps on the Puerto Rican flag to put out the fire he set with a sparkler, and forced HBO to saddle Blazing Saddles with a dreary 3-minute introductory spiel by an academic explaining to the unwary idiots, that racist language and attitudes pervade the film. But those attitudes are espoused by characters in the film who are portrayed here as explicitly small-minded, ignorant bigots. That was the whole point of Mel Brooks's film, right? Is to make fun of these people and the characters and the way they live their lives, and that made it funny. But of course, the academics had to put a 3-minute thing in front of Blazing Saddles about how you might be triggered because, it is saying a lot of things or making fun of things that you might not find funny. Well, you know what? Don't watch it. So the article continues. No wonder that even non-edgy comedians like Jerry Seinfeld, won't go anywhere near a college campus. And he won't. In a remarkable turnabout, today's students have all the live and let live joie de vivre of Dean Wormer from Animal House. In other words, they're not very much fun. Progressives have been getting away with comic murder for quite a while now, not only being unfunny, but also through their dominance of entertainment and especially social media, empowering themselves to dictate what others should be allowed to find funny. Nowhere is this more evident than in political humor, whereas progressive internet snarkmeister Andy Borowitz is widely hailed as a wit in the hallowed tradition of New Yorker predecessors James Thurber and Dorothy Parker, equivalent voices on the right are routinely deplatformed and defamed. When the Babylon Bee, they're going to love this, podcast listeners, listen to this. When the Babylon Bee, the Onion's conservative foil, belatedly came to the attention of the cultural torquemadas at the New York Times, the paper ran a story asserting the site, quote, frequently trafficked in misinformation under the guise of satire. The Babylon Bee's response, in addition in addition to threatening legal action, which got the gray lady of the New York Times to back down, it produced another of its all too on-target headlines. And that headline from the Babylon Bee, quote, New York Times attacks Babylon Bee for being more accurate than they are. Talk about striking back at the exact right tone. Yes, those who police our common culture are indeed an unsettling bunch in enforcing their smelly orthodoxies, pitting black against white, young against old, poor against rich. They are undermining the foundations of the republic. But know what's also true? In their indifference to truth and basic biology, in the profound intolerance of their vaunted tolerance, in their astonishing lack of self-awareness, they are ridiculous. And know what gets them even more apoplectic than imagined dog whistles of faux hate speech? And might just turn the tide in the culture war, making them the laughingstock that they so richly deserve to be. This was written by Mr. Stein. His name is Will Stein, I believe, in the Wall Street Journal. And his name is Harry Stein, in the Wall Street Journal. And really, that is his theme. His theme is really that last sentence there, which is, do you want to get them back, the left back, for stopping you from telling jokes and stopping you from having your normal conversation with friends and others? Make them the laughingstock that they richly deserve to be. No better example than that is the fact that the left is telling us now that men can get pregnant and have babies. Of course, that's absurd. It's biologically impossible. We should just laugh at them. We should laugh in their faces. We should tell jokes that make fun of them, but also do it in an intelligent way, and then they become the laughingstock. By the way, in the Wall Street Journal, there's an opportunity to provide a conversation, to make a comment under any article, right? This particular article only was just published, and there are 646 comments already. I mean, and the comments are worth reading because there are already a couple of people that are triggered by, of course, they're triggered by the article, and they're like, oh man, that's not true. I hear jokes all the time that I find, awful, and they're just offensive, and I don't really think that should happen ever. Well, guess what? Bill Maher, 6 years ago, spoke about this very subject. That's right, the comedian Bill Maher. I always wish he would just spell his name M-A-R, but it's M-A-H-E-R. So it looks like it's Maher, but it's Bill Maher, right? Mm-hmm. And it just drives me crazy because it's just a strange way to spell it. But the guy's really funny, and he makes fun of Republicans constantly, and I still find him funny, okay? He makes fun of the woke left all the time, and I find that funny. And that's the whole point of comedy. You must be able to laugh at yourself. Well, we have a couple of clips from him, and he is talking, of course, 6 years ago about this very issue. And he starts out by saying, the left doesn't even know how to laugh anymore, which is, of course, just like the article that I read seconds ago from the Wall Street Journal. And I know that you've experienced the same thing. We're going to play the first of these two clips. First up, we have a clip from Bill Maher talking about how the left does not know how to laugh anymore. And he really uses humor to, of course, make fun of how they don't like humor, which is really the point here, ladies and gentlemen. We have to learn how to laugh at ourselves again. Here's that first clip. Here it is.
This is what Jerry Seinfeld was complaining about last week when he said college audiences just want to use these words. That's racist. That's sexist. That's prejudice. They don't even know what they're talking about. An opinion echoed by Chris Rock, who said he stopped playing colleges because of their unwillingness to offend anybody. And Larry the Cable Guy concurs. He said, it really is a shame that nobody can handle comedy anymore. When Chris Rock, Jerry Seinfeld, and Larry the Cable Guy say you have a stick up your ass, you don't have to wait for the x-rays to come back.
That's good stuff.
That's right, a black, a Jew, and a redneck walk onto a college campus, and they all can't wait to leave.
So, can you imagine in the 21st century, in 2021, starting out a joke. A black, a Jew, and a redneck walked onto a college campus, and that was the opening line of your joke. It would be impossible to tell such a joke, not just to some of the people that you don't know in a setting, but also even in front of a college audience, you couldn't tell that joke. And this is where it all started, podcast listeners. It started on college campuses, it being the intolerant left. They started out saying, nothing is funny anymore. There is no longer any humor unless it is humor that makes fun of conservatives and Republicans and the American way of life. There is otherwise no humor. Humor is dead. And so then that expanded to the left nationwide. So now nationwide, of course, and that, by the way, that clip was from Bill Maher 6 years ago. So fast forward, he was, of course, initially talking about, college campuses. Fast forward, now it's everywhere. It's not just on college campuses. It's in everyday life. Look how the cancel culture is taken over. Try saying something or tweeting something or posting something on social media or getting into a meeting or a Zoom meeting with your colleagues and just saying something that is maybe not inappropriate at all, but just taken the wrong way. It can ruin your career. It can certainly stunt your career. It can slow you down from getting any kind of advancement. We all know that. And yet we haven't done anything about it. All we're saying now as a defense, as conservatives, is, well, your problem is that you're just part of the cancel culture. You're part of, okay, well, that might be true. What we should do instead, and what we should do instead per the Wall Street Journal's article, and I also think what Bill Maher is telling us indirectly as well, is we just should laugh at them. We should continue to tell the jokes and make jokes about them. Maybe make jokes about, hey, there was a Jew and an intolerant person and a Catholic, and, just go down that line. And by the way, I can say all those things, and I can certainly explain myself to people as an elected official because I know how to laugh at myself. I don't just wake up during the day and decide, I'm going to do today? I'm going to only laugh at others. I laugh at myself all the time, which is why I listen to podcast listeners, people like Bill Maher, who makes fun of conservatives constantly and incessantly. And so here he is again, Bill Maher, 6 years ago in the same monologue, talking about how there are rules of engagement when you tell jokes. I mean, there are certain rules that have been put into place, and you have to follow those rules. And if you don't follow those rules, if you go outside that scope, you're in trouble and you're going to be canceled, which is why people like Seinfeld and Larry the Cable Guy and Chris Rock won't go on campuses. Well, this is an incredible clip. You're going to love this one. Here it is.
The PC police aren't saying you can't make jokes. You just can't make them about a protected species. Jokes about men, yes. Gay men, no. Kim Kardashian's ass, yes. Her stepfather's tits, no. If someone on the internet expresses the wrong views about gays, women, or Jews, they're subject to endless shaming, unless they're Muslim, in which case all that intolerance is a cultural difference which we just have to tolerate. Because, of course, it's a religion of peace. There's a piece of you there, there's a piece of you there.
So that's some pretty edgy comedy there, right? In normal times, it would just be something that you would blow off and say, ha, 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 that's funny. We can make fun of any culture. We can make fun of any person. We can make fun of any religion. We can make fun of any race. We can make fun of any sexual preference. And we can do all of those things and do it together and laugh at ourselves as well as laugh at each other. Well, shockingly, Bill Maher didn't get canceled for this 6 years ago, but that's only because of the fact that he spends enough time making fun of conservatives. In fact, he spends most of his time doing that, which I think is why he gets the pass, quite frankly. But it's perfectly makes sense, right? You can, on the one hand, make fun of Kim Kardashian's, behind, but you can't make fun of her. What's his name's Bruce Jenner's, right? Or what's the new name of Bruce Jenner? Caitlyn Jenner's boobs, right? You can't do that. And these have become cultural norms in joke telling, which is ridiculous. How can we not find this funny? And how can we not find this? And I'm pretty sure, by the way, that Caitlyn Jenner probably laughs at herself as well, or himself, because now Caitlyn Jenner is running for governor of California. At least I think Caitlyn Jenner is still running for governor of California. I haven't seen a lot of information about Caitlyn Jenner out there recently. But nonetheless, we have to learn how to, as conservatives, make fun of the left in a joking way and laugh at them when they say absurd things, as well as try to cancel us over things that we say that we find funny, but they may not. And then say to them, hey, here's an idea. You were just triggered by what I said. Why don't you say a joke that you think that will insult me? And I'm sure I'll probably find it funny. I'm not going to get insulted. I'm not. By the way, conservatives don't. They, as a general principle, we know how to take a joke and laugh, including jokes that are about us. And it's just, the case in point is, I have a colleague in the Maryland General Assembly, and he routinely makes fun of the Democrat Party. Whenever they come out with their latest and greatest crazy thing, he'll say, well, what do you expect from the party that believes that men can get pregnant? And I think that's great. And I say to him, I challenge him. I'm like, you know what you need to do? You need to put that on social media. Because if you put that on social media, about the latest thing that they want to do, like the Democrat Party wants everybody to wear a mask, but they want millions of people to come across the border maskless and not be vaccinated. And so you see all of these inconsistencies, and you have to almost laugh, if not cry, over that issue about how messed up the Democrat Party is. And then you can then say, well, this is the logic from the party that believes that men can get pregnant, and put that on social media. And you know what? You would probably get attacked like crazy. They would want to cancel you like crazy. They might even report you, if you're an elected official, to the Speaker of the House, or to the state Senate president, or to the governor. And they might want to get all the elected officials to come out against you, but they're kind of missing the point, because what's happening when you do that is you're making them look the way they need to look, which is absurd and laughable that they would even believe that such a thing would be acceptable. And that is, laughter can defeat the left. So next up, podcast listeners, speaking of why we need laughter, speaking of why we need to laugh at ourselves and laugh at how stupid the media has become, in Forbes magazine, certainly not an unheard of magazine, right? Forbes has been around for a long time. They have an article titled, "Why Speaking English May Spread More Coronavirus Than Some Other Languages." I got to say that again. Why speaking English may spread coronavirus more than some other languages that you might speak. New research suggests that English speakers put more droplets into the air when they talk, which may make them more likely to spread COVID-19. Since the novel coronavirus is spread by droplets, how spitty a language is might contribute to different rates of the disease. It all comes down to something called aspirated consonants, the sounds we make that spray more droplets of saliva into the air. In college, everyone knew which professors spit the most when they lectured. The front row of the classes were always empty after the first day of class because the high achievers who sat there had been bathed with the lecturer's saliva. Give me a break. When a lecture was particularly boring, students might find themselves fascinated by the way the sunlight caught droplets of spit hanging in the air around the professor. Memories of teachers who were the loud talkers is one thing, yet now we know that simply speaking English could mean we are all spitting on the people around us. No, actually, we don't know that now, but this is the article, nonetheless, that they're trying to push forward. We all know the coughing or sneezing spreads germs. That's how we get colds, and blah, 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 blah. So the article just goes on, and it says, aspirated consonants throw spit into the air. So I'm going to read this section. While Japanese has few aspirated consonants, leading speakers to produce little spit while talking, English has 3 of them. Specifically, the consonants P, T, and K are aspirated in English. Making those sounds throws a myriad of tiny droplets from the speaker's respiratory tract into the air, treating a cloud of spit. creating a cloud of spit. If that person is carrying a virus, the air is now full of viral particles. So this is where we have to use humor, podcast listeners, to make fun of these lefties who hate our language. This is not someone who's trying to tell you something that is really truly science-based, because there's no scientific study that she cites or has done. No, this is just someone who probably hates the English language and wants you to think to yourself, oh, well, I'm sure glad all those people who speak Spanish are coming across the border right now because, that's going to be a lot less likely for COVID to be spread by them because they don't speak English, they speak Spanish. And how about the Haitians? The Haitians speak French. So thank goodness they speak French and not English because they're not going to spread, coronavirus when they cross the border illegally. Clearly, that's where all this is leading. And this is once again where we have to make fun of the left. We have to learn how to laugh at them, literally laugh in their faces about the stupidity of these kinds of articles. Because the right and conservatives are saying, you know what we need to do? We need to solve the coronavirus problem. And there are a lot of ways to solve the coronavirus problem. Obviously, one of them is to convince China to stop messing with these variants and getting involved with coronavirus studies that can result in their release and killing millions of people across the globe. Well, that would be a good start. Another start would be for us to not fund these studies through the CDC. And then another study, of course, would be for all of us to maybe put the kibosh on the massive immigration that results in the spreading of these diseases, among other things. But instead, the left is saying, well, what the real problem is? Problem is that you speak English. If you just knew how to speak Spanish or German or French or Italian, yeah, you wouldn't be so awful, or maybe speak Japanese. That might solve the problem. So can't make this stuff up. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the daily Biden dumpster fire. So we've done this before, and I think every day we could have a daily Biden dumpster fire. I didn't even have to look that hard, by the way, to find this. This is brand new. Literally came out today. So Joe Biden raises eyebrows with the claim that he used to drive an 18-wheeler truck. So in Fox News, 48-year political veteran President Joe Biden raised eyebrows when he claimed that he used to drive an 18-wheeler truck, a claim the White House struggled to defend. The White House is like, well, we're not going to try to, do any fact backup on this. It's probably not true. Biden was visiting a Mack truck facility in Pennsylvania. Mack trucks. It's a facility that makes them or assembles them. When he made the claim that he may have driven the massive trucks before. Actually, he made the claim that he did drive them before, which required a special kind of license. So remember, when you see these big 18-wheelers that are passing you on the highways and on the beltways throughout America, which is never very much fun when they're driving by you, especially if you have one on either side of you on a highway or a beltway and you're in the middle. It's very intimidating. And you kind of want to get out of that situation and accelerate to get out of it or brake to get out of it. Well, those guys who drive those trucks have to have special licenses and special training because the trucks are so huge. It requires a lot of skill. It's not just like you can hop in one and drive it. So Biden is saying, used to have one of those licenses and used to drive them. So he's visiting the Mack truck facility in Pennsylvania, and he made the claim that he drove them before. And he said, I used to drive an 18-wheeler, man, Biden said yesterday. This is a really short clip. You have to listen to it carefully, but there are these people lined up in front of a Mack truck as they're showcasing their facility in front of the president of the United States, in at least a facility where we are, assembling and or manufacturing something in the United States, which is a good thing. And Biden is visiting it. But of course, he can't help himself but embellish the fact that he drove a Mack truck. You'd think it'd be enough. He's president of the United States, but it's to embellish it even more. We have that clip, and here it is.
And Anyway,
And if we
I
don't
used to
do
drive an 18-wheeler, man.
Yeah.
Oh, I wish
Oh,
I
yeah?
could.
That's
I
awesome.
got to.
And the media's there. The media's all over the place. Cameras everywhere, as you would expect, because that's what he wanted, because this was a press moment, so that everybody could see him at this Mack truck facility and see, wow, Joe Biden is so wonderful. We make these Mack trucks here. We assemble them here. Isn't this wonderful? So he's got everybody there watching him. You know, all these jobs are being created. And then it's like, hey, I used to drive one of those. Once again, this is important. We have to learn how to laugh at them in their faces, because this is just funny. This is humor, right? You got this guy who's ahead of the free world, and he has to still lie. And I think this is part of, now throughout his career, by the way, podcast listeners, Joe Biden has been well known to lie and to plagiarize. And this has all been demonstrated because of the many millions of times probably by this point that he's been on TV and spoken to the media and so forth. So we have all that information. What's different now is we have an aging Biden who is kind of losing it. And I think this is kind of an example of somebody who really wasn't thinking this through the way he should. And the older that he gets, I think the less of a filter that he has. So before, he would lie probably in the right places, and the right places where he didn't think he was being watched or heard, and he could just kind of make things up. But now as an older person, and if not, an elderly person who is clearly losing his way, certainly his mind is not where it needs to be, he's willing to say just about anything, and he's losing credibility. I mean, none of those people there at this facility, I'm sure, believed that he drove a truck. None of them, right? So you immediately lose credibility, which is not something that somebody who's president of the United States with a full mind and full capacity would ever do. You would never willingly want to lose your credibility as president of the United States over something so minor. And he's doing it all of the time with these Biden dumpster fires. And there's no doubt in my mind, there's going to be a time that's going to come, and it's in the near future, by the way. Definitely, I think, before the 2022 election, although that's not what they want, the Democrats. They want him to stay just through the 2022 election. I think he's going to have to be replaced. And by replaced, that means, the vice president steps up and he steps down. And then I was just talking to Christopher Hopkins here, our producer, before we started. And it's like, well, who's going to take over as vice president? So that's how it works, right? So the president steps down. He is clearly not of the full mind that is required to do the job. The president steps down. The vice president steps up. The vice president then appoints somebody. Who does she appoint, podcast listeners? Who do you think she's going to appoint? Anybody? I think she is going to appoint, Kamala Harris is going to appoint, you ready for this? I think she's going to appoint Hillary Clinton. I really do. And then we were making a joke like, well, how long do you think it'll take if she appoints Hillary Clinton for Kamala to drive off of a bridge or, be shot somehow, or I don't know what else. What other random thing could happen to her?
Kill herself, but she's got 2 bullet wounds in the head.
That's right. She kills herself with 2 bullet wounds in the head. And by the way, podcast listeners, we're not wishing this on her at all. So I want to make this really clear. But we're saying this in jest because it seems like whoever's affiliated with the Clintons ends up dying if they're in the way of the Clintons advancing in their careers. And so I think it's still strongly possible that Kamala would choose Hillary. And then we would have 2 women in charge of the United States of America, and 2 women with very strong personalities. I got to tell you something. Kamala, just by itself, if she were to step up to be president of the United States, the Democrats are going to get skewered in the 2022 elections. They need Joe to stay in office at least through the end of November in 2022 after the midterm elections, because as hard as it is to believe, he is better than Kamala for the Democrat Party in terms of garnering votes, because he's the head of the party. If she's the head of the party, I certainly don't see anyone wanting to be motivated to vote Democrat. Case in point, Joe Biden's his poll numbers are sinking. So in the Wall Street Journal, it's like Joe is sinking, basically. And a lot of this is just because of his policies, right? Well, she's from California. She's going to double down on these policies because she actually believes in the crazy ass policies that they put into place in California, and she wants to bring those to the United States. And we see what's happening in California, of course, with their economy and with their environment and how they've mismanaged just about everything. And with the overpopulation that has occurred in California, largely because of illegal immigration. Not a good thing. A lot of things not so good happening in California. People can't wait to leave. Well, if she gets in charge, it'll be worse. But in the meantime, we have Joe Biden, and the Wall Street Journal is saying the country's partisan polarization has intensified every year since George W. Bush won the presidency in 2000 as a result of the hanging Chad elections. From Capitol Hill to Main Street, Republicans and Democrats don't even bother discussing anything of political substance. What's the point if 90% of the opposition is against whatever you've got? That leaves independence as the only thing that moves elections. That's true, by the way. And the bad news for Mr. Biden and his party's immovable 90%ers is the independents are now in motion. In mid-June, granted it's the end of July, but in mid-June, Mr. Biden's approval rating in the Gallup poll was a decent 56%. It's now, today, in the end of July, 50%. Among independents, he's at 48%. Down 7 points. If you were in a plane that lost altitude that fast, you'd be white knuckling both armrests. So as you can see, the Biden administration is in a free fall, a complete free fall in the polls. And in the meantime, he's having these dumpster fires where he can't even talk. He can't even communicate. He isn't making sense. He can't really answer a question. He pulls out the little note cards that he has in his pocket, and they have like the little sentences he's supposed to read to answer questions. In some cases, it tells him who's he supposed to call on. Like there are a bunch of reporters, and he can't even remember which reporters are friendly, so he has to have it written down for him and call those reporters. It's gotten that bad. So independents, I think, don't like his policies. I don't think independents are moving away from Biden because he's losing his mind. I think they're moving away from him because they don't like his policies. With Kamala Harris, I think if she takes over, they're going to not like anything about her. They're not going to like her policies. They're not going to like her general attitude. They're not going to like the fact that they believe that she's not qualified. And I want to explain that, podcast listeners, so I don't get in trouble. I don't think she's qualified because I don't think she's ever been challenged in any election or in any debate. I don't think she's been challenged in anything that she's done. I think everything has pretty much been handed to this woman. And as president of the United States, the presidents that are the best are the ones that have been challenged along the way. They've had many elections. They've persevered. They've been challenged by both sides. They've had primaries and they've had general elections. And they've really, at the end of the day, done a great job and persevered. Not Kamala Harris. She's used to everybody agreeing with what she says. Everybody around her always agrees with her. That's California. You don't really need to listen to the opposition in California because the opposition is so small that they're inconsequential when it comes to statewide elections. Now, granted, that might be changing a little bit with Gavin Newsom because he's completely messed up the economy. But with Kamala, she's now vice president of the United States, and all through her career, she hasn't had that possibility of ever being challenged. So if she is elevated to president of the United States, I see independents moving another 20 points. And by moving, it means moving away from Kamala and the Democrats and moving toward the Republicans. There will be a bloodbath in November. And I know what you're thinking, podcast listeners. You're like, well, that's good because, bloodbath and we take over the House, we took over the Senate. You know what? I agree with you. Okay, that would be good because then we would have checks and balances in place. with the legislature versus the executive branch. But I'm actually talking about the state legislatures. Because when Obama was in office, the Republican Party gained 1,000 seats in state legislatures across the country. 1,000. In fact, that's when I got elected. I was one of those 1,000. And now, if Kamala takes over, we're going to gain another 1,000 seats, I am convinced, in state legislatures over the remaining 2 years of her term. I am absolutely convinced. And that will be game-changing to the country. Game-changing. And everybody knows that this is a possibility, but the Democrats are the one that chose her to be the vice president of the United States. They chose her. She was the chosen one to be his nominee. Did they not think that at some point the guy was too old and was going to maybe lose it and have to be replaced? And did they not realize that she was the person in our Constitution who's going to take over? I mean, have you watched her in an interview? Have you actually watched her in an interview and observed how nasty she gets when she's asked questions with which she doesn't know the answer, or questions that challenge her credibility because she said one thing last year and another thing this year? She can't deal with it. She can't. And the American people don't like that. They don't like politicians who aren't at least jovial and about, mistakes they've made. And I guess the term is self-deprecating. They don't like that. They're not into it. They don't think that that's a good thing at all. So that is the Biden dumpster fire, and Kamala Harris is going to take over, at least at some point. So get this, podcast listeners. Have you ever rented a house or a room through Airbnb or through VRBO HomeAway? Or I think the other one is hotels. No, not hotels. There's another one. Forgotten what it's called. There's a third one. These are called peer-to-peer platforms, right? A peer-to-peer platform is nothing more than a website that connects person A with person B. Person A has a house that they want to rent or a room, and person B wants to rent that room. Well, Airbnb and VRBO are those platforms, and that's what they do. And I don't know about you guys, but I think this is a fantastic thing. I know it's been around for a while. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, except that what progressed from that platform was this idea that why don't we put together car owners with people who rent cars? So when you fly into an airport, I'm sure you have done this before. You fly into an airport, and in advance of flying in, you rent a car. And right now there's a huge problem with renting cars because there aren't enough cars that the car rental companies have, which is why used cars are so expensive. So there's this company called Turo. You go online there, and a person in the city that you're going to fly into who has a car will rent you their car. And they'll drop the car off to you at the airport, or you Uber to a location where they have their various cars parked. They might rent 1 or 2 or 3 cars at a time. You rent them, and as a general principle, the selection on Turo is a lot larger than the selection if you were to go to Budget, for example, or one of the other car rental companies. And so Turo started. Now that's really doing well. So guess what is next in these kinds of platforms, these so-called peer-to-peer platforms? You know what it is? It's called Swimly. Swimly. It's Swimply, excuse me. It should be Swimly. I don't know why it's Swimply. It's Swimply. So Swimply in the Wall Street Journal is the Airbnb of pools. You heard that correctly. So Jim Baton's tree-lined swimming pool at his home outside Portland, Oregon, has been sitting untouched since his youngest daughter moved out 2 years ago. Then in September, he listed it through an online platform for renting private pools. He booked the pool 3 times within the first 2 hours that he put up the pictures of his pool, and says he has hosted 2,700 guests in less than a year. Mr. Baton expects to have earned $111,000 by the end of this summer, which would just cover the $110,000 that he and his wife spent on the entire pool to build it 8 years ago. I thought, wow, that's weird, Mr. Baton said. It's nice to feel like we didn't have to spend all $110,000 for nothing. He is one of 13,000 pool owners in 125 markets across the United States, including cities like Los Angeles, Austin, Texas, who are crashing in on their underused pool by listing it with this company called Swimply. Why Swimp? I don't know. Which some media reports have dubbed the Airbnb for backyard pools, probably because Swimly's taken. I bet that's probably why it is. Swimply said its pool owners have made about 122,000 bookings since the start of the company in 2020. Business began picking up before the COVID-19 pandemic, but it boomed during the health crisis as public pools closed. Makes sense. And people sought to make extra cash or safely gather after months of lockdowns. We've seen a lot of families and friends rekindling with Swimply, said Boonam Laskin, Swimply co-founder and chief executive. Hosts on average, get this, podcast listeners, hosts on average earn between $5,000 and $10,000 a month. According to Asher Weinberger, Swimply's co-founder and chief operating officer, most pool owners charge between $35 and $50 an hour per person, by the way, while Swimply collects 15% from the hosts and another 10% from the guests. That seems pretty excessive, but they're getting it. Some of the hosts' earnings help pay for costs related to the maintenance of the pool, which you would expect, the insurance and so forth. And that's because chemicals for pools have gone up in price because of the supply chain disruptions. Mr. Weinberger said he now spends $85 a week on chemicals and servicing his pool, up from $45. So this is what I can tell you, podcast listeners. I have good friends that have two grown sons. They're in the workplace, and both sons no longer use their pool. One son bought his own home. The other son is in the workplace, and he does live home, but he doesn't go swimming in the pool anymore because he's so busy with his friends and his job and so forth. And so the parents can't just shut down the pool for the summer. A pool has to be opened in the summertime. It has to be maintained. It'll be ruined otherwise. So you have to not just keep the water in it, but you also have to have it treated regularly with chemicals and shock and all these other things that you're supposed to do, and skim it and clean out the skimmers, clean out the filter and backwash it. All this stuff you have to do. It's time consuming and it's expensive, especially when you don't use the pool anymore. So this is something that they're considering, and I bet that there are like thousands of people out there that could do the same thing. I thought this was newsworthy for the podcast because I just think it's pretty fascinating that there are people that think of these ideas. I mean, the person who thought of Airbnb and VRBO, that's brilliant, right? Because Airbnb, podcast listeners, now has a larger market capitalization than Marriott Hotels, the largest hotel company in the world. So I'm not sure if you caught that. A company that doesn't own bricks and mortar hotels is worth more on the marketplace in terms of its overall value than a company that owns thousands of hotels nationwide and worldwide. Pretty extraordinary. And so it's also a good idea. And then this guy comes up and he starts Turo. So you rent cars online, and it's just you're renting a car directly from somebody else who happens to have an extra car. And then now swimming pools. So what's next? Boats, maybe, Chris? We could do boats. I'm not sure I'd want anyone to use my boat. Not that I have a great boat, because I really don't. But I mean, because I think a boat's pretty easy to mess up. A car is too, by the way. Pool's pretty difficult because it's made of concrete. It's hard to mess up a pool. Pretty easy to mess up a house. But you get to rate these people and they rate you. So there's a decent check and balance to make sure that they don't mess up these things. But I feel like there are endless platforms out there. And this is leading us to what I think is a sharing economy where you have ownership, but the ownership is much more widely shared than it ever has before, because you realize that there is income you can make from it, and there's freedom in that income, because the income that you receive allows you to travel and do things that you otherwise would not be able to do. I mean, who thought that a pool in your backyard, an in-ground pool that's really nice, you could make $111,000 from that pool over the summertime? I mean, that's enough money where it might, it's a lot of worries, a lot of headaches, a lot of, babysitting might be worth it. It just might be worth it. And I don't have a pool. That's not where I'm going with this. I don't own a pool. But there are probably other things that we can also find that could be rented out there just for business ideas. You could create a platform. I mean, Uber did the same thing, right? I mean, Uber is like, we're just a platform. We're not a taxi cab company. The person out there has a car, and they're going to use their car to pick people up, and that's good enough. Uber doesn't own any of the cars, so it's the same kind of concept. So I just think this is pretty cool. It's a neat thing, and it's good to talk about things on the podcast. They're actually very positive, that make people's lives more normal, especially during COVID, right? And this is the other takeaway I had from this article from the Wall Street Journal about Swimly when you rent your pool. And that is, so many people were suffering because they don't have pools. Summer is hot, and the public pools have been closed. By the way, some public pools have still not opened. And these individuals can then go online, and since these pools are in private property, they can choose to take that risk to swim in those pools, because if they're really worried about COVID, obviously, and the same thing for the people that are renters, and the same thing with the people who are the owners. They're like, you know what, COVID, I don't really care. I'm going to go swim because I need to have some sort of exercise and fun. And it's 95 degrees outside, and wouldn't it be nice? And so this is uniquely American, this idea that people come up with ideas to solve problems in times of great crisis. And Swimly did this in perfect timing at the beginning of 2020. And ever since then, they've rented 122,000 pools. They've had 122,000 bookings. So pretty cool stuff. Really cool stuff. And so, podcast listeners, you probably heard us say this before about California, about how there isn't enough electricity to power the state of California. We've talked about this before, okay? But what shocks me is that there isn't enough electricity in California again this summer. Again, with all of the heat waves and the fires and so forth, there isn't enough power. And so the citizens of California are being asked to cut back on their use of power again. So in CNN magazine online, California's power grid operator has issued a statewide alert urging residents to cut back electricity use. California's power grid operator has issued a statewide alert urging residents to cut back electricity use today due to higher than normal temperatures expected in Northern California and tight energy supplies across the West. Folks, in the summertime, there are always higher than normal temperatures. And in the wintertime, interestingly enough, there are often temperatures that are lower than normal. Yet, officials called for voluntary electricity conservation from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. to avoid rolling outages during the persistent heat, the California Independent System Operator said in a press release. In order to avoid straining the state's power grid, consumers are urged to turn off all unnecessary lights, set air conditioner thermostats on 78 degrees or higher, and delay using major appliances after 9 p.m. The conservation measures can help stabilize the power grid during a time of tight demand and supply to avoid power interruptions. And guess why all this has happened and continues to happen? Well, it continues to happen in California for one really simple reason, and that is that in the state of California, they have these mandates in place that are dismantling the reliable portions of the grid that create baseload power and replacing it with intermittent power, as we've talked about before. Why hasn't California fixed this? This is a third world country then. A third world country is one in which basic things no longer function properly. Basic things that we take for granted, like you can't get the trash picked up, so you got to burn it in the backyard, or you create your own, dump. Or the basic thing that you would expect would be electricity would be delivered to your house, and it would be reliable, and you wouldn't have rolling blackouts or rolling brownouts. Yet in the Los Angeles Times in September of 2020, just last year, they had an exact similar article. It says, "Why does California's power grid keep flirting with disaster? Well, we've got answers." And so they talk about the same thing, not enough power, and then the fires and global warming. They always give you this nonsense in California about the reasons are global warming and fires and just it's really hot. Except what they don't tell you is the truth. And it says here, let's see, it says Californians responded in force using far less energy when asked, but electric utilities turned to their western neighbors for extra power supply. In other words, they had to go out of state for the power. The Trump administration last year granted an emergency request to California officials to allow 3 Los Angeles area gas plants to produce more electricity. In other words, they had the natural gas plants in California to produce the electricity they needed. But because of California's extreme laws, they shut them down and made people not have electricity. That's a third world country. And so most of California narrowly avoided shortage last year because of the induced rolling blackouts, even as heat-related equipment failures knocked out electricity to 115,000 homes. And so this story is going to continue to repeat itself, just as we've talked about in previous podcasts, where the story about there not being enough water in California continues to repeat itself until they take the bold steps that are necessary to fix the problem. And that is use common sense. Okay? The left wants to throw us into the Stone Age, and they want to at least start by putting us into third world status. We cannot allow this to happen. And I believe the Californians are going to push back. At least some point, they're going to wake up and say, you know what? There actually really isn't a crisis. The crisis is a crisis of stupidity. The crisis is there's a lack of wisdom. And that's the last word from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.